What treaty that the whites have kept has the red man broken? Not one. What treaty that the white man ever made with us have they kept? Not one. Sitting Bull, Hunkpapa.
The northern plains mirrored the south, with Indian nations being driven onto reservations. Yet a handful of leaders refused to sign treaties and were determined to remain free at any cost. These defiant leaders became heroes to Indian people across the plains. Among them, 2 men from the Sioux nations stood alone. One was the venerated Hunkpapa holy man, Sitting Bull. The other was a young Oglala fighting man whose fierce military genius struck fear into his enemies and inspired fervent followers. His image would never be captured by photographers or artists, but his spirit of pride and resistance would be carried on by his people. His name was Crazy Horse. In the summer of 1876, thousands of Cheyenne, Arapaho, and people from many Sioux nations fled the reservations to join Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse in a great encampment along the Little Bighorn River in present-day Montana. The gathering, possibly the largest in Plains history, swelled to 8,000, with camp circles stretching for miles. The Indian people were well aware that this could be their last great celebration of freedom. There, far from any white settlements, they would hunt the last remaining buffalo, feast, race ponies, visit with old friends and relatives, and join in a massive sun dance that would be remembered for generations. On June 25, 1876, as the United States prepared to celebrate 100 years of freedom, 5 companies of the 7th Cavalry under George Armstrong Custer advanced on Sitting Bull's camp. It was not until the dust from the 7th Cavalry rose over the hills that the startled encampment learned of the troops. 2 Moons, leader of the Northern Cheyenne, was swimming in the creek.
I looked up the Little Horn towards Sitting Bull's camp. I saw a great dust rising. It looked like a whirlwind.
Women were screaming and men were letting out war cries. We could hear old men calling, "Soldiers are here! Young men, go out and fight them!"
Crazy Horse rode through the camp, gathering his men, as Custer's surprise attack stirred panic among the women and children.
Children were hunting for their mothers. Mothers were anxiously trying to find their children. The air was so full of dust I could not see where to go. Wooden Leg, Northern Cheyenne.
While the young men rode into battle, Sitting Bull rallied the men still in camp to protect the women and children. The Hunkpapa under Gall and the Oglala under Crazy Horse quickly rode out and counterattacked.
Many hundreds of Indians on horseback were dashing to and fro in front of a body of soldiers. The soldiers were on the level valley ground and were shooting with rifles. Not many bullets were being sent back at them, but thousands of arrows were falling among them. Wooden Leg, Northern Cheyenne.
A big dust was whirling on the hill, and then the horses began coming out of it with empty saddles. Black Elk, Oglala.
The battle was over in less than half an hour. Custer, 260 men of the 7th Cavalry, and as many as 150 Indian people lay dead. Cheyenne survivors of the massacre of Black Kettle's people along the Washita River exulted in the death of Custer, the man they called Woman Killer. But that night, Sitting Bull was reflective.
My heart is full of sorrow that so many were killed on each side. But when they compel us to fight, we must fight. Tonight, we shall mourn for our dead, and for those brave white men lying on the hillside. Sitting Bull, Hung Papa.
The next day, firing the grass as cover, the Indian forces broke camp and headed toward the Bighorn Mountains. News of the battle reached the outside world on July 4th, 1876, dampening a giddy U.S. centennial celebration. The next morning's newspapers, ignoring all evidence, called it a massacre.
We felt that it was a great battle, not a massacre. The soldiers were going to compel us to stay on our reservation and take away from us our country. We were trying to get away from them. Runs the enemy, Cuthead Sioux.
Outraged by what was seen as an affront to their national pride, the American public cried out for immediate reprisal. Punitive expeditions were sent out, mercilessly hunting down the last free bands of the northern plains. Sitting Bull's Hunkpapa escaped into Canada, where they received political asylum. Crazy Horse's Oglala took refuge in the Black Hills, where the full force of the United States Army was turned on them. For months, the Army was unable to defeat or capture the Oglala leader. Finally, the U.S. made peace overtures to Crazy Horse, promising land, generous subsidies, and protection if he and his starving people turned themselves in. On May 5th, 1877, after nearly a year of successfully eluding the all-out manhunt, Crazy Horse led nearly 1,000 followers to surrender at Camp Robinson. Oglala, already at the agency, lined the route, singing and cheering. One U.S. Army officer marveled that it was a triumphal march, not a surrender. The leader, who had known nothing but the freedom of the plains, was stripped of his horse and gun. Then, 4 months later, on September 5th, 1877, believing he was going to a meeting with the commander of Fort Robinson, Crazy Horse was led past an armed guard to the doorway of a building. Inside was a small barred cell, 3 feet wide by 6 feet tall. Crazy Horse resisted. A soldier thrust a bayonet into his back. That night, as Crazy Horse lay dying, he told his father, "Tell the people, it is no use to count on me anymore." Crazy Horse was laid to rest near the creek called Wounded Knee.